According to sexual anorexia, people who experience sexual anorexia often have low knowledge related to sex and sexuality. And it lists several reasons for that. One is they often just weren't given good sex ed in their families or in their schools or through cultural osmosis or whatever. Like part of developing sexual anorexia often coming from a family that had a lot of shame or misinformation or over moralizing of sex and sexuality. Another aspect is the obsession itself, which the book kind of suggests that sexual anorexia is like a negative obsession with sex, like you're so afraid of it that you think about it all the time, but that obsession prevented learning because you're so afraid of it that you try so hard to avoid it that you don't even want to learn about bodies or sex. The third reason is sexual anorexics often perceive sex as being very separate from normal life. So like they think of it as this like extra additional thing rather than like a fundamental part of life. And so there often can be this sense that like you don't need to learn about it because if it's not your thing, then it's just like an extra unnecessary thing. Like, well, I don't know that much about skiing or whatever. A lot of times the initial shame that developed, whether it is from if you're gonna keep making noise, you have to come make an appearance in the TikTok. Yeah, come here. People are taught basically that sex is bad or shameful. Sometimes that is taught through culture, like purity culture, or parents who were ashamed of these topics themselves and like kids kind of got that passed down. Other times it is more from like sexual abuse, that they just kind of inherently feel that there's shame in the situation, and they, rather than recognizing that the shame is that this adult is doing a bad thing to a child, they just assume that like everything sex related is shameful. And then the problem that can create is it can be reinforced when somebody who has like preconceived shame related to sexuality has any sort of negative consensual experience. So if you as a young child develop shame surrounding sexuality, and then the first time that you attempt to make out with somebody it doesn't go very well, or there's something kind of awkward about it, that can really reinforce that, oh, this happened because this was bad and I should be ashamed. And so just anything going wrong or just not super positively in like early experiences can really reconfirm those initial beliefs that this is bad and shameful and should be avoided. When of course in reality it's just that everybody has some imperfect experiences when they are first exploring. Another issue that can contribute to sexual anorexics not learning about sex and sexuality is they often were raised in families that gives rules around sex rather than information. So I'm guessing a really common form of that might be just you just don't do it until you're married, or something like that, rather than like educating about like risks and benefits and anatomy and all of those kinds of things. And a lot of times kids are given, this explicitly says in the book, kids are given rules, but then they see that a lot of times even their own parents who are giving them those rules don't follow those rules themselves. And so, or they see lots of other adults who aren't following these rules. And so that can really create a really confusing relationship around, are there any rules? Are there all of the rules? Do only some people have to follow the rules? Like it just, there's can be a lot of hypocrisy with that kind of a thing, and that can be really confusing. And kind of in that confusion, and again, somebody who has these issues is already going to want to avoid this topic. It's just kind of another reason to just kind of not deal with it or not investigate more, not try to learn more if it's confusing and it doesn't make sense. And finally is denial. A lot of times people with sexual anorexia don't realize that their relationship with sex is atypical. They, like in other parts of this book, it even says like a lot of times they might even think that they are superior for not like being controlled by their sex drive, things like that. So that denial can just further their ignorance, and that if you think that you don't have a problem and that you are coping well, then why would you ever seek out additional information or try to problem solve if there's nothing there? So that denial can really contribute.